Go ahead if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, we're waiting for one more.
Oh, okay.
One more software engineer in this case.
I see.
Because in this course there are no students, only software engineers. Yeah.
That sounds like a threat.
Yeah. Right.
I brought one of these. You want to use this too?
What is this? The pointer?
It also moves the PowerPoints. So you can hold this going down, presses it to the next slide up.
Where it has some receiver?
Yeah, it goes in here.
Not the PowerPoint exactly.
Oh, never mind.
It's kind of like pretty.
Never mind, then it won't work probably.
Yeah,
It only
but I
works.
think if you have PowerPoint, it will work.
Yeah.
I have PowerPoint.
Okay. That's good. I'll use that later. It's to be in the screen.
Yeah, sure.
And I've got my USB here.
Yeah. So I think we can start, or shall we wait?
Load my thing.
I think we can start. The class is already at 3:31.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, so I will briefly introduce in 5 minutes
Okay.
the software development life cycle, because that gives a good background for this particular project, right? So basically, the term software engineering, it was, yeah, I have just started like 10 seconds ago. So this term software engineering, it came into.
This cable is stable.
It was proposed in 1968. So basically, there was a conference organized by NATO to discuss software crisis. So basically, making a software was a new field then, and then people were facing serious difficulties in making the software that has multiple components, also make it work organization-wise across. So people started brainstorming together, and then they thought, okay, let us have some structured approach for creating the software, and that's how the term software engineering came up. And afterwards, people started sharing best practices and their experiences, and then that emerged as a fully new discipline. So in the next lectures, we will see how it has evolved from 1969 to this date. But if you look at the global picture, then the economies of all the developed nations, they are heavily dependent on the software, right? So there are more and more systems, software control. So there is tremendous amount of automation in everyday life, including the factories, space shuttles, aircrafts, trains, right? As well as the daily living stuff like the smart sensors, etc. So basically, software engineering, learning the software engineering will enable you to develop a software professionally. So that will be useful for use by other people. And software engineering is also quite a significant amount of software development contributes to significant amount of gross national product. So it is also it is quite expensive to deliver a good software. So among like 100 software projects, 10 projects actually come into the practice. That's the statistics. So the following is a standard life cycle for software development. These are some standard phases. Okay, so the first of all, you have to understand the problem. Okay, you have to find out what are your capacities. You have to create, you have to allocate a budget for that in terms of time and money. Be ready to do the project planning, right? Then the second one is the analyzing the requirements for the software which you want to develop, for whom you would like to develop, what you would like to develop, right? So there are some funny memes I will share with you in the next lecture, like understanding requirements properly, etc. Then the third one comes about creating a design, the user interface of a software, which is just like a wireframes or a storyboard. So that basically the customer can approve like the look and feel of the software, which kind of functionality is in that, right? After this design, basically you will come up with some design document. So, after this requirement analysis, the first step, you will come up with a design document that will show the design in terms of standard languages like the UML, and then also decide about the technology choices, right? And then start developing the code, software, working in the teams, right? So the next steps are implementation, testing, and then showing this to the customer. If the customer is satisfied with that, then you can go ahead and then make a delivery. Otherwise, you have to again start this cycle of requirement analysis, changing the software, etc. Until it's ready for the customer. And after deploying in the customer side, you have to maintain it. So sometimes there are new versions of software coming. Sometimes new feature requests are made. So you have to keep on maintaining and revising the software. So one of the popular approaches which has taken the industry by storm is called as agile development. So this is a big step over the traditional approaches like the waterfall model. So in the waterfall model, for example, the implementation happens as one of the last stages, and before there is quite much emphasis on solid designing, solid requirement analysis. So make your requirement crystal clear, and then we will design consider only those requirements. However, the agile development is based on the principle that you will seek the review from the customer every now and then, and you will try to accommodate new feature requests as soon as they made. And also agile development works in cycles, development cycles. So basically, if you see that there could be couple of more 2-3 development cycles at least, like integration, testing, then the review, feedback, whether it is approved by the customer, then it is released to the market, and if it is not approved, again you go through this process of adjusting to the customer requirements. Okay, so this development happens over the iterations. Those are called as sprints. So sprint is basically say 2 weeks or 3 weeks schedule. So before the sprint, people define what are the goals for this sprint, and then at the end of the sprint, people validate against the goals, whether all the goals have been met or not, if people are facing any difficulties, and it is adjusted, and so on. Right? So we will cover this in detail in the subsequent lectures, the agile development as well as various aspects of.
Is that like releasing the alpha and the beta, and then the cycle? After each cycle, you release an alpha, you get the.
Yes,
oh,
yes.
Okay.
So there are usually like start is the initiate project, define requirements, and then you start building up, rapidly prototype the version. So at the end of every sprint, there should be some kind of demo ready. So you can keep on refining the demo until it meets the requirements. That is the goal behind agile development. So people, I mean, you don't have to, in this model, the customer doesn't have to wait until all the requirements are crystal clear, until all the design is made, until all the platform is available, and then the product is built. So customer has to wait till customer sees the product in the traditional models. However, in the agile, customer has a opportunity to see the products every now and then, how they are progressing. So that is more flexible because customer can put requirements or make some changes early on in the development. Because earlier you make the changes, the better it is, because you can be flexible, so it doesn't waste your time, right? So in the traditional approaches, once you develop a complete software, it is not according to customer expectations, then basically whole efforts are gone, and also there might be some other developments in between, and customer doesn't need a software. So that those kind of drawbacks are avoided by agile, and this has better success rate compared to other models like the waterfall models. So yeah, we have invited Dr. Whitaker here, and then he's going to explain about commodity ecology as well as the type of applications he would like you to be developed. And then please feel free to ask as many questions as you can to him, so it is clear to them, clear to you what exactly is expected from him.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Nice to see you here. And I think I've preloaded a few things. Let's see if it's visible. Not visible.
So maybe you would also like to take some notes.
It's not recognizing my USB. Well, Murphy's Law, right? It's not recognizing my USB.
What device is obsolete?
Well, it works on other rooms. This room is still not as updated.
You want to use my laptop?
No, I gotta. Don't understand. What I would like to do is just pop up to my office on the next floor in 2 minutes, bring it down, or put it on a cloud drive, and then it'll be easier for me to download it. My apologies, but I'll be back in just a second. This is not working at all.
Can you use my laptop? I have a cable so I can connect it.
If it works, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Wow, it works. Great. Thank you. Good job.
So maybe at a point in time I have to connect it to power.
Okay. Yeah, it's working now. Yes. It's probably Thank you, Dr. Farbar. You've proven my case. I used to do hardware troubleshooting back in graduate school. You always start with the hardware first. You don't try to fix software. Because it's typically a hardware problem. If you start off thinking it's software and it ends up being a plug, you've got a huge problem. Hi, I'm Mark Whitaker. I'm here at the Department of Technology and Society. I will present this at the United Nations actually in April this year. They're interested in that. It was featured on one of their websites. But my interest and background, I'm a comparative historical theorist and development generator. I'm an environmental sociologist, and here I teach interactions of environment, technology, and society. And so I have taken it upon myself to develop classes in mobile development, which means using mobile networks as a developmental model. This is called ICT4SD. It started in probably the first decade of the year 2000 or so. But after smartphones began to accelerate social access to the internet and mobile networks, then people began to use mobile phones really as a developmental tool. And this is a continuation of the idea of using a mobile app that is distributed amongst people for social services. And the social service that I'm thinking about right now is called Commodity Ecology. And there are several versions of this that I'll talk about. And just thank you for your interest in this. So, which mobile apps are good for sustainable development? I'll give 3 examples for a future sustainable world based upon my applied research on this. Originally my PhD was in sociology and environmental sociology, as I said, and I'm here at the Department of Technology and Society at Stony Brook. But anyway, so 5 sections in my review. First, educational backgrounds. I've got some awards from the past from the U.S. National Science Foundation and ironically, the Korean National Science Foundation a few years ago from some of my work. The second point I'll be talking about is theoretical and empirical point that there are global network effects now of over 5 billion global smartphones. Well, there's actually 2.5 billion smartphones, but over 5 billion mobile phones at this point right now. So that's a massive level for market access and social sharing of information. Efficiency is achieved both in rich and poor countries alike because it's a shared common basis to develop a mobile app. And I'm interested in platforms that encourage all of this kind of sustainable development across a mobile application. From that, the applied knowledge is there's a network effect because of over 5 billion phones, at least 2.5 billion smartphones right now. Led ideas to create the following versions of 3 mobile apps. These ideas came about before mobile networks even existed. But as I increasingly have been taught mobile development, these are sort of a new version of older ideas that really were not even thought about as connected to an internet-based network or a mobile network. But now I think the best way to express these ideas is to merge it in a software form that can be shared as a virtual community instead of simply as a physical community as I thought before. But anyway, the first one that probably Dr. Proar has told you about, Commodity Ecology, the database assignment idea. It's the United Nations recognized idea of a modular, mobile, and multi-regional worldwide sustainable development. You know, if we all live in watersheds all over the world, I'll describe that in a minute. If we all live in watersheds all over the world, the idea is use that as a rubric in which to create virtual communities to help people develop their own sustainable societies per region. It's not a substitute for a global economy. I kind of see it as a plan B. In case the global economy does have ups and downs, there is a backup system for people to maintain livelihood. And it's also toward making better options for particular regional sustainability. The second point is really the game. It's a youth version, a gamification of this with 5 ways to get points that I'll describe about in building a sustainable regional idea. And the next point is a civic democratic institution, which is really the companion institution for commodity ecology. This idea is for recognizing non-governmental, less politically partisan heroes and how to identify them per region, sort of tagging them and allowing people to vote on a short list in a particular region, up or down. Anyway, the point is, how many of you have heard of these 3 people? Okay. Probably heard of Moore's Law, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's Moore's Law? Yeah.
18 months or like 24 months.
Yeah.
Double.
Yeah, it's been updated like the last 2 or 3 years. It's getting a little bit different than his original estimation, but it's surprising for an early 1970s theory about the expansion of chip density in transistors. It's been pretty accurate for almost 30 years or more. That's amazing in itself. So that's Moore's Law. I wouldn't really call it a law. It's a hypothesis that you can expect to plan for chip densities and power and cheapness to continue to grow at a certain rate. It's useful for budgeting the next cycle of machines. Building on Moore is Metcalfe. Metcalfe is about network value. It's the idea that once you have cheaper, smaller things, that there is not just a value in the product physically, but there's a value in the network quality of the product. The more networked it is, the more value it has. Think of a fax machine. If you had the only fax machine in the world, it's not useful. But if you're connected to a network of 100,000 people with a fax machine, it has value. One smartphone is not useful. 5 billion potential smartphones are incredibly useful. And the third point is McGuire. McGuire about mobility. It's not just, if you have computer networks in the early internet, that's a network value, the ARPANET. But, increasingly the backbones of the larger physical net are connected to more mobile handsets around the world. And there's a mobile value of things that can be taken with you at all times. Think of the movement towards laptops, smartphones, tablets. Nobody carries around large boom boxes anymore for music, right? It's literally everything is mobile and compact within the service. So when I think about mobile development, I really think about those 3 levels of value that come out of a mobile service. And smaller chips have allowed mobility cheapness, as I said, and as I said, that allowed the development of network value. And increasingly, ever smaller chips and ever cheaper chips have allowed more mobility in those networks. And that has increased tremendously, particularly after 2007 and the introduction of the flat glass smartphone by Apple, which the world has copied and seen as the current standard for how you would design a smartphone. But anyway, the value of mobile network development is higher versus only network development. And remember these three themes by an abbreviation. ChipNet, vamos if you speak Spanish. Just remember, chips, networks, value-added mobile services. So you can remember ChipNet, vamos, you remember those three things. I'm big on abbreviations. It's very useful to remember that. Trust me, you're trying to sleep tonight, you'll think about chipset vamos, and you'll wonder what it was about. But anyway, development, I think, is more efficiently implemented when it has this network value and is a mobile network service, because people don't simply network once. Once there is a network, that network begins to be used for multiple things. Like, for instance, people thought that when Twitter developed, people would simply tell everybody, what I'm doing right now, and I'm eating this piece of cake. But increasingly, it's become a global newswire. And political people use it to get around media gatekeeping on their messages. So those are additional civil services. People buy and sell and can do advertisements for businesses across over 300 million different accounts on Twitter. There's over 1 billion accounts on Instagram. Recently, the Iranian foreign minister resigned across Instagram, by the way. That was the official testament. So Instagram has been used for resignations and things like that.
Well,
I know that's what I mean. Once you develop a network, it gets used for multiple different things. And I think once we develop a commodity ecology database online, you will see what I mean. It will have multiple levels of feedback. Economists will call this a multiplier effect. It will have more than just that kind of effect that it was intended for. But anyway, skipping forward, people prefer mobile network development, I argue, because greater future network potential of it in any participatory choice and self-improvement, facilitated by their interpretations of how many other users are in that network community. So we're logging on and using about 2.5 billion smartphone community by building this app. Yes?
So actually in India, nowadays the government officials, they use WhatsApp for calling people, like in the midnight, you do this, do that.
Right.
Exactly.
I have a 2019 update to show you exactly the density of both African and Indian smartphones in just a minute too. So in honor of you hosting me, thank you very much. But anyway, it's based on people's assumption of how a developmental service app becomes more valued over others if it has greater mobile potential. So all those three, that's like the stoplight, red, yellow, green, right? All those stop things work together in a mobile app. Anyway, moving on. Here is the original network value. This is just United States data. So look how long it took in the United States for a telephone to become a network. But once a telephone was a network, look how fast it was for the internet, which relied on the telephone network to develop. And then once those were developed, look how much faster a mobile network developed. So this is, the fastest adopted technology in world history, the smartphone. Not just the mobile phone, which in the United States took a lot longer, almost over 20 years. It took almost 6 or 7 years to reach over 70% of the US population. The same thing is happening, ironically, in less developed countries and developing countries, because they don't have access to multiple things. So if you want something cheap and mobile, an entire family can use a mobile application for education, for looking at weather reports about agricultural commodities, for mobile money, for instance, in Kenya, which is used by almost 80% of the Kenyan population, because they don't have a strong formal banking sector. So it becomes very easy to use the mobile network value for everything. It's not just a phone anymore. Even in the United States, people don't use it as a phone. Last year, texting is now the #1 time user on a phone, as then the web, and then calling people. So it's hard to really call it a phone. It's really just a link in a network. And that's what designing a good mobile app could do. You could participate in global development quite easily because the transaction costs are very down. As you're talking about software-based development, everyone has access to software-based development. Not everybody has access to $1 billion, but everybody has access to a brain around the world. And that makes a more even playing field for equal participation within such an arrangement. But anyway, this is cell phone access has skyrocketed. This is to 2015, source is the World Bank. The black line is the world average. Above the world average, notice places you would not expect, like Thailand, Russia, Middle East and North Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So those are denser than the world average. Poorer countries generally are denser. That's what I find in teaching my class, Mobile Revolution and Development, several times, that the hypothesis is it's the network value of a mobile network structure like this is so valued because they don't have anything else. So many different services get thrown into being connected to that. It becomes very crucial. In fact, in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there is more access to mobile phones per capita than electricity per capita. So mobile phones are leading electricity. It's more important to have connections, and that leads to development later within electrical desire, building a desire for recharging and things like that. Down here, we have South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, but nonetheless, still quite large. It's over 50% by 2015. Moving on, I've got some global statistics from 2018, and then 2019 down here. Both Africa and India are included too. But global digital snapshot from 2017. If you notice the population then, 7.4 billion. Internet users were just in that year cresting 50%. But the more valued network was 66%. There's mobile phones, unique mobile users is what that says, is 66%. So it's not really an internet world, it's really a mobile network world of mobile phones. And this is active mobile social users. Here's the talk icon, right? The talk icon, a little bit less than the global users for social media, but almost at par with that for a virtual community. 2019, what's changed? They rearranged it a bit because this was more prominent. From 66, it's just grown 1% in 2 years. Internet has actually grown up, 57%. Social media has jumped to 45. And mobile use of social media is at 42% globally. That's amazing. When you think that 10 years ago, a smartphone didn't exist. As I said, if there's 5 billion smartphones right now, that's what that says. 5.1 billion. 10 years ago, there were barely even mobile phones. It's 2.5 smartphones. This is unique mobile users here. What about other regions where you think is less developed? But nonetheless, Africa in 2018 crested 1 billion smartphones. Much more, than internet users at 34%. When the population of all of Africa is 1.2 billion. Social media only 14%. Africa from 2018 to 2019, social media has gone up 2. Mobile phones have gone up, or gone down by 2%, but the gross number has gone up. It's just the population has grown. So it's around 80%. Unique internet users, 34% to 36%, not much change, but this is so much more than this. Mobile subscriptions is the major central network. So participating in a mobile app is really the best way to reach a greater number of people. That's just the point. What about India? India, there's 1.3 billion in India right now. Mobile subscriptions, 1.1 billion at 87%. What about people chatting? 23% social media, 21% social. Internet users in India, 41%. Once again, the mobile networks has greater value. There you are, thank you. Yeah, but first of 3 ideas I'll go over. Commodity ecology is 130 different set positions. So the database would have 130 separate sections within it, which each person could contribute to. But these would be sections per region, and I'll describe that in a minute. But for more information, go to the website that I've had for a long, long time of this. About 15, 20 years I've been working on this. I used to tell my friends in graduate school, I think there's 15 categories. And like, oh really, but now, I look back, that was ridiculous. Now I think there's over 130 categories of, what we do. Historically invented social uses for commodities. The things we do with materials have different purposes. And I'll describe those later. But textiles, software, hardware, energy, ambient heat, conductors, semiconductors, all those things rely on our knowledge about particular material options. And this database is conceived as a place for people to share sustainable options per region and adding more choices to people's conceptions. So anyway, in July of last year, the United Nations Academic Impact Office, or UNAI, featured my Commodity Ecology initiative as a good method towards sustainable development goals and practice, as better policy path towards sustainability by getting specific on 130 material choices. And as I said, I'm going to go to the UN Secretariat in April of this year to chat about that. Anyway, Commodity Ecology was made head of the list of Sustainable Development Goal number 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. That's what that means. But that's a very abstract goal. This gets very specific about what that means. And it's the only idea in the category that's got its own UN webpage. If you want to go there, you can verify that. But a desired mobile app would provide a database platform for this commodity ecology. The rubrics for commodity ecology comprise a set of 130 different material technical categories. These allow us to consider 3 interrelated questions. This is sort of the goal, the spirit of what this is for. It's aided by a regular real or virtual community conference across social media or the app itself, and ideally by the durable connections of a shared mobile phone application. It can be used by practitioners of development, citizens in general, giving their input, consumers that want something in a particular region, or even producers that want to demonstrate they have something sustainable as well. So they normally don't talk to each other. Typically we use markets for consumers and producers to talk to each other, and citizens talk to the government. But if they all, I think, in a particular region would have more capacity in a virtual community to chat with one another, you would really have a greater way with the market and outside of the market to develop better market-based choices that are sustainable. Anyway, the 3 questions that are the spirit of this are, 1, do we have enough plural sustainable choices in the category yet in this particular region? Number 2, are we choosing well in this category towards sustainability in this particular region? How might we help local consumers, producers, and the environment at the same time by linking the categories? In other words, by understanding what wastes come out of one industry. Sometimes they're very useful wastes, like sulfuric acid doesn't have to go into the sky and make smog. You might bottle it if you had a knowledge of another group in that area willing to purchase it. So it's a way not only to advertise sustainable products, but to have a database of particular wastes that might be economically used in the same region to keep it out of the sink of our commons environment.
So I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a question.
Uh-huh.
What you have done this classification of commodities, right?
Right.
So how does the classification contribute to sustainability?
How does the classification move towards sustainability?
Yeah, exactly. So
Because
sustainable
in particular,
yeah,
go ahead.
we will reduce the waste and then make the best use of the available resources and maybe use the recycling
Right.
and things like that.
Right, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, it is a rubric for allowing people in a region to look at that chart of 130 categories and say what they have and what they don't have yet. So what they get clear on their priorities of what they should develop in a particular region. Like if they come to the conclusion like, well, we don't really have the different kinds of agricultural pesticides, herbicides that are, we might try to work on that because there's more externalities in that than anything else. It's just a checklist. Previously, like the UN goal was just sustainable production and consumption.
Mm.
How do you know when you achieve that?
Mm.
There's no rubric.
Okay.
There's no checklist. This is kind of a checklist. And that answers the question right here. Commodity ecology is less abstract and interpretive than the sustainable development goals. Why? Because you either have sustainable options or you don't. And it makes it very clear where the holes are in particular regions. It allows people as a group to notice that. And previously there was no rubric for noticing those kind of holes or massive amounts of waste streams, or a place to debate about it. Previously the debate would be on the national level, but regions are highly inequitable, and particular regions experience externalities far more than the national group does. Anyway, there's nothing interpretive about that. There's 130 categories. You either have multiple options in there or you don't. You either link waste streams of these various industries or you don't, or you lack ideas for it. Very simple. It is a rubric, an ongoing checklist for sustainability because of those issues, because it puts in a physical written form or a demonstratable form what needs to be done per region. Unlike merely abstract goals and interpretive standards of when we get to sustainable development goals. A good example is like gender equity. How do you know and interpret when you get there? I mean, all the sustainable development goals are like that. They're sort of statements of principles without any way where the rubber hits the road, without any way to actually begin to move towards it or measure it. And this 130 different categories is a way to begin to measure that. And since no one ever knows when you achieve a sustainable development goal, because those goals are without rubrics or methods for the most part. Plus, my argument is that you will achieve many other sustainable development goals once you start developing this. Why? Because so much of these other rubrics of social life is improved once we begin with a sustainable regional material interaction. Once that is in place, a lot of other problems of inequalities, pollution reduction, other issues innately begin to be solved. So, moving on, thus SDGs are achieved as secondary multiplier effects of first building a more representative commodity ecology. And of course, that's there, but what about for you? You're thinking about designing this as a database. What are some of my wish list? Wish list features of a mobile app, a flow diagram. First, people would come and they would perhaps be GPS tagged. I wouldn't know how that would work, but I'm dreaming, I've seen this happen on an app called PoliFact, or it's a United States social media app for politics. When you come to it, you're immediately tagged, and it shows you, these are your representatives in this region. So it has some map behind it in the engine. And I imagine the maps could also be used as watersheds. And I'll show you some images of watersheds in a minute. So once that is, you're given the option of clicking into these regions already. You're pre-assigned where you physically are standing. And then, there's a newswire per region of all of these 130 categories. And you can click on one particular category of material and scroll through and see what are the good ideas that people have added. Or you notice there are no good ideas yet, which may encourage you to find some way of putting a good idea in the database. A general post page, that's how you would do it. And the general post page could have things you want to check. For instance, if you have a good idea for a particular material, you may notice this material would be good for textiles, but it's also good for recycling for animal food. So you can click animal fodder and textiles at the same time. Those are just two categories. I know you can't possibly see this, but there is a larger version at the website that I'll show you in a second. That can be posted simultaneously to different threads. This used to exist at Indie Media. Indie Media, before there were mobile phones, was a global newswire, which allowed people and social movements to post news about social movements and other things outside of a corporate environment. And they could classify what this was. This is an action for environmental issues, this is a gender action, is this, and then you could go to those particular gender actions and see the history of those particular categories. You go to the environment and see the history of everything posted under that. Anyway, the gamification version is another idea. This is, of course, for consumers to come to this database and click in particular regions looking for solutions or posting new ideas. This is also for producers who want to advertise that they do have something sustainable to offer. Therefore, it's kind of a freemium service. This is totally open right now. This is draft. The idea that it's free for everyone, but it may be a service you might offer for cost for producers to subsidize it. Maybe ads could be taken out upon it to highlight particular things. Distributed running app? Is it going to be used IPFS? You know about IPFS? Interplanetary File System, Wanbene. How did you know about this? I'm very impressed. There's one person nodding besides me. And it's like, how did you know about that?
I was looking into like tor networks.
Okay.
How tor operates, so it's part of the
Yeah.
research that they were doing.
I'm thinking this could be built with IPFS because I like the idea of a distributed network. And if it, particularly in areas with low internet connectivity, coming back to a central server somewhere in Europe or the United States is not valid. It won't work. You need to have coming back to the most local version of this, wherever it may be. And hopefully it could be a distributed database with holochain or blockchain. So running on each other's phones. There's a really good example of websites now that run on your own computer instead of running on a central server. Like BitChute or DTube. These are not, there are no central databases. It's like YouTube, but it's DTube, decentralized tube. And there is no central database hosting all those videos. Anybody who goes there, there's a distributed power being generated across the network, and it's running the whole system. There is no central place to censor. There is no central place to end. It can't be broken, in other words, unless people just stop using the website. So I'm thinking, these I distributed, that's the ideal. Who knows if that's possible in a prototype? I don't, but the point is, Post as monetized currency. It more upvotes on something. Maybe that's the new coin. A new currency could be used on the website, like Steemit. You've been to Steemit? Steemit is a blog. If people like your blog post, you can upvote on them, and that gives you Steemit coin. And then you can use Steemit coin. It's using Steemit, which is a game platform. But Steemit.com, there's a lot of websites now, what I call second generation social media. They're not based on centralized servers. They're based on decentralized servers where they're monetized by the users themselves. And that would provide another double incentive for people to use the service if they get some kind of value back. If they get coin that's spendable on this website for greater exposure to their own ideas, that would be great. That's exactly what happens at Steemit. If somebody likes your post or your commentary, they upvote it, you get Steemit coin, and you can use that to expand your reach in the service itself. You're monetizing your likes, basically. But anyway, as I said, this is a draft form. Up to you what is in the prototype in this semester, whether it includes all of the wish list or just a few. If you choose this, make it useful learning experiences. So push your boundaries and learn about how you would make a stable, transparent app that couldn't be censored. That's another secondary aspect. Suggestion here is now in just one language, English as a prototype, but obviously the entire world does not speak English, so it would only be useful in an English-speaking group if there was only one option. Same with if it's only useful for high bandwidth smartphones, it's not going to be very useful. It needs to be very useful. If you can roll it out in sub-Saharan Africa, that's the ideal. If you can roll it out in that kind of context, that would be the best way to do it. Anyway, what are the rubrics? GPS maps are being ping tagged when visitors come. Watershed maps. You've heard of watersheds before? Watersheds are just wherever water falls across a mountain line, it falls to the center and flows out. For instance, this is the United States map from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, where they said everyone lives in a watershed. And they mean, and it's from a place called Surf Your Watershed website. This is about 20 years old. But they were trying to popularize people conceiving of their lives as involved in particular geographic zones where there's pollution, where there's common problems. We may have different political opinions, but the point is, we all have the common problem of a particular region geographically. I think there's a geographic politics that is not captured very well by political parties, which are sort of ideological. But anyway, for instance, think about water. If water falls right here, it goes up here in the Mississippi. If water falls just a few kilometers over here, it goes to the Tennessee River, it goes down. If water falls over here, it goes all the way to the terminus of the Mississippi. If it falls here, it will go right there. This is the continental divide. So watersheds don't just capture water. They capture sort of a geographic pollution of all kinds. And so that's why I think it's a better way to think about a bounded region. And they're also nested. These numbers, there's actually a 6-digit code. This is the major code of 12, but there's actually 2 more digits for a subgroup and then another subgroup. So it's possible to code literally the entire world with 6 digits. How many of you know about what3words.com? What3words, you know about that? They can't. What3words is also an African version which doesn't rely on a central database, which is accessible even when the website's down. It's from Ghana. It's called Snoocode, Snoocode, if you're curious about what a decentralized mapping app looks like. Snoocode, I think, is much preferable to What3words. Why? Because Snoocode is more privacy. What3words requires a centralized database, and not everybody will have access to that at all times, permanent internet connection. So designing for permanent internet connections is not really a good idea, I think. Anyway, but that's what the whole world looks like. And literally, there's a watershed map of the entire planet from grasshopper geography. All those different zones are where water falls and flows to a point. Here's the United States that I just showed you in a different zone. Here's the Texas zone, right, 12. But within that, there are several subzones. And this is the case that all watersheds are nested in the world like this. So, just to show back and forth what it looks like. But anyway, here's what Africa looks like, just to get a picture. Imagine people standing with a phone in different regions and being encouraged to click on a region that may have a larger eco-regional context or even a smaller zone of themselves. Here's Australia. This is Germany. This is Russia. This is Europe.
I'm curious about why are some of the regions really large and really small regions as well?
Because that's simply where water falls geographically.
So
If water falls anywhere in here, it goes to the terminus here in the Danube. If it falls here, what is this? Here's France. No, this is the Baltic. This is right where St. Petersburg is. It's a much smaller catchment basin.
and all these watersheds, they lead to the ocean, or do any of them lead to lakes or larger bodies of water?
There are some that are closed. There are closed watersheds, like this one.
And it doesn't go anywhere.
It doesn't go anywhere.
It just
That's
goes
very
to a lake.
rare though in the entire world. A closed catchment basin is highly rare. Normally they all flow somewhere. Like you see how long, like almost the entire United States is drained into this point. But you know, across, there's a mountain chain here. So the mountain chain is divided in many ways into separate regions. So water falls here, it flows here, but 1 kilometer over here, it would go over here or over there. So good question about the dynamics. I mean, this of course took maybe 200 years for people to really map the whole world on this level. But these are from, there's many other versions of watershed maps. These are from grasshopper geography. I just like them because they are colorful. And it'd be fun to click on them or make them accessible as an awareness of a regional issue in the app itself. But that's ancillary, that's secondary issue. Moving on, there's Europe. But I'm thinking also, ideally, whether a prototype works, I don't know, but I'm thinking IPFS, some kind of decentralized structure. If this is a distributed network, it's very hard to interrupt that. But if you lose the central server or database access, or you require every query to go back to a central place, this is not going to be valid for India or Sub-Saharan Africa or South America if the whole world is served by one zone. So the movement now is towards like edge effects of networks. There's so much more computing going on, and I think that not even decentralized would work. That it would be good if somehow this could be distributed across the processing power of smartphones, or people who volunteer to put their local computer on the network as a subsidy for the whole network. I mean, you could volunteer your network, your computer time, and your downtime. There are apps right now that actually allow you to do cryptocurrency. You can, in the background of your other applications on a desktop computer, you can run cryptocurrency, and it doesn't give it to you, but it will donate it to a charity. So charities are even getting involved with making distributed apps for raising money for themselves by processing things for the Bitcoin network. So I mean, there's so many ideas happening now. It's impossible to summarize all the inventive things happening. We've only had 10 years of this mobile network. Think what it would be like in 30. I mean, that's where we are. We're on the total edge of a massive change in our whole civilization towards networks where nobody is left out. And that's never happened. Mostly the poor have always been left out. Mostly people in marginal regions have been left out. That may not happen anymore. There may be a better development for multiple regions now because of this mobile network potential. But number two, these are much shorter. Just one slide for this. Second app, network mobile development, is a gamification of what I've described. Getting them to think about the fun, of putting materials together in their region as a game that can be won, as well as debated with others. Ideas for this are still open. One of them is sharing pictures and labeling and getting to know their region online in each category, like a large real-world scavenger hunt. I also think kids are raised on mobile phones increasingly, and they take pictures and tag things and put it online. If they come across something, they could tag it and get credit with their friends that they found more categories in their region of materials. It changes your eyes if you have some game, and gamification is really good for education. The more categories, at least 5 ways, at least 5 ways to get points, I think. The more categories one person finds, photographs, tags, uploads, submits in your watershed region, the more points that person has as a child. The more options you find per category in your watershed region, the more points. Yes, yeah.
So why watershed is a region? Why not country, district?
Why not what?
Why not like location, geography, like country-wise or
You can do
state-wise?
that. You can do that.
No, but there might be some something like why do you want to have? Why do you specifically mention there is a watershed as a region?
Because that's geophysically real.
Okay.
Boundaries of countries are not geophysically real. If
Yeah,
you're
that's
cur-
true.
A lot of them are. A lot of it's kind of a false dichotomy to think that geographic country boundaries are not based on physical things. A lot of them really are. Particularly they're connected or at watersheds or mountain lines. So a lot of the countries do follow that, but also a lot of people who live in borders, they don't identify with either side. And this is a way not to ignore the fact that a lot of externalities of a country are put in the border zone. Think of between the United States and Mexico, called the Maquiladora line. Maquiladora is a place of 200 different factories right on the edge of Mexico with no environmental standards, and they ship their products a few miles north in the United States. So they get out of the environment. But the whole border region is poisoned on both sides. Those people have a lot in common either side of the border. Those people live in a common watershed of the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande is split. The Rio Grande is the physical border, but the Rio Grande is the larger watershed is on both sides. So it kind of encourages people to collaborate. It encourages collaboration across them. I think if it's only a national sense, it ends up being a competition between that. But I do think there's a benefit to nationalism. I think nationalism is more beneficial than the past forms of government that we've ever had. But I do think that on the edges of nations, it allows us to have some kind of intergovernmental connectivity. What has made the European Union somewhat successful is there are over 400 different intergovernmental connections on particular borders. That's really what makes it work. There's grants that fund particular German-French collaboration on something. And I imagine this would encourage people to collaborate in a similar way. So it's good topics, the issues that I've thought about that you're bringing up too. But other points, other 5 ways, more options you propose and invent for your watershed region, the more points you have. Yeah.
So I was interested in the game part. I don't think it's going to be fair if some regions are bigger. So if you're doing it by regions, and there's the idea behind the app is there's some type of game that's adding some interest into putting more information, submitting more information, then it's going to be pretty obvious that some regions don't have some categories, and the big regions, they have much more categories.
But they're not competing across regions.
Oh.
This is not a global, competition of regions.
Okay.
This is an optimization of a region. And so it doesn't matter if, the watershed of the Mississippi is so much larger. It's the same issue in a different area. There's no way to, it's like apples and oranges, I think. But that's a good point. I never thought that would on the surface, they're not in competition.
Yeah.
They're collaborating in a region. And what other groups do, that is useful. You can go to another region and say, how did they link those things? And you can see, what ideas that other regions have had, and you can apply that and post it in your own zone. So I don't see it as a competition. I think there's a learning. Like whoever starts with a great idea for linking 4 or 5 different zones, equitably, interestingly, ecologically, somebody else may think, oh, we have 2 of those. Why don't we just add this thing to our zone and we can do what they do? So I imagine it's not going to be such a tribalistic regionalism. It's sort of like a common project globally in different regions, and that everybody is willing to share the way they did it as expertise in another region. So that's, I don't, it's not like a nation who gets the best points, it's just region. If whoever has the happiest, most equitably, elegantly joined region is the winner. I mean, and that can be won on different standards in different regions, I think. Yeah. But the last one, more suggested ways of linking the flows. If people could provide a link between things. I think those are 5 ways to make points in a particular region, which are interesting. The more upvotes for your ideas, the more people that look at it, I like that. I don't like the idea of downvotes. I think that swamps things. If you don't want to downvote, you just don't vote. Otherwise, you end up crashing the whole system with negativity. But anyway, the third point is the companion. It's a partner in all watersheds. Third vocation, called a civil democratic institution, a means of recognizing who are the already supported leaders. So instead of tagging materials and categories, you're just saying, I like this guy, or I like this woman's work and what they're doing now. They're not politically promising anything. They're not like a candidate who promises all the world and then lies and says, ha ha ha, I'm in power now. Doesn't matter. But the point is, these people are not running for office. They're simply recognized. And they just get a pat on the back by aggregate numbers of people in their area. And I think once enough of these regional people are recognized, they sort of have a natural geographic politics to collaborate themselves. And that's what I see as very useful for recognizing people as a representative of a geography and not as a political party per se. But anyways, it's non-governmental, recognition of civil leaders, and its special means of voting for recognition is in the book. It's a good venue of collaborative moderates and not polarized factions. It was first featured in my book of 2005 called Toward a Bioregional State. And now we live in a mobile network world that is good for popularizing this as well. More on this in the book, but also these websites. I'll make this stuff available to you. I've only written the last one. These are other people talking about my ideas on another website. Yeah.
So how would you choose the people who are inside, like, the leaders?
Well, do you admire anyone in Songo? Okay, then you wouldn't vote on anybody. But other people would.
And you would have to get their consent to get their, like...
No, you're just recognizing them. You're not electing them to anything. It's not an election, it's just simply a social recognition. For particularly, people become issues. People become issues if they're recognized enough. And it would happen every year. So they're not like permanently recognized. They may become an evil wizard later, But the point is, every year it's kind of updated, just recognition society of who's doing a good job in this zone. Who do we collectively agree? Maybe there's some person who's doing a good job in some things, but he's very polarizing. Then you'd have the right, you vote down on those people. I don't want this polarizing person in here. This person collaborates best. And so if you're allowed to upvote and downvote on people, I think, who are just civic citizens, you don't generate these boundaries of factions fighting each other for upvotes. And so you kind of end the psychopathic rule of elites that are narcissistic and only thinking about themselves and hating their other groups. Of those people, most people hate those people, but there's no way to vote against them unless you appeal to somebody else. But in this voting system, you just vote down on those people. And you've tried not to. But why is this? This is a conclusion. Why network mobile development is the best bang for the buck? Because for weaker dominated states or corrupted states, merges community development and mobile smartphone culture. More bang for the development buck in mobile development because many corrupt, weak states are without the capacity to create expensive infrastructures for roads, schools, industries, banks. Instead, we have mobile software-based virtual communities becoming the main shared infrastructures and platforms for underdeveloped areas, and even for marginalized peoples in stronger states. Think of marginal regions in India. Think of marginal regions in Cameroon. Cameroon is a French-speaking African country with a minority of English speakers that live in the mountains. And that's where all the disasters happen. That's where the worst pollution is. Everybody can think of a region in their society that is historically marginalized. In the history of South Korea, it's Jeollado or Jeju. Historically, we're outside the Chosun dynasty. That's why there's such a different kind of politics in Jeollado compared to the Gyeongsang, for instance, in Korea. But anyway, just to summarize, this is the new mobile network that we're living in. Why not use it for mobile development? And in a globally evenly saturated market, mobile phone networks are a greater crucial part in developing and less developed countries, and a shared platform. That's the point. It's a shared platform between rich and poor. The digital divide, I think, is being demoted because mobile phones are being developed everywhere. I'll skip forward through this. That's not that important. But the point is, thank you for listening. And one closing quote from an educational reviewer of Africa, for instance. He said, the one technology that spans rich and poor alike in places like this is not the industrial technology. It's not electricity or water. It's the mobile phone. If you were to design from scratch virtually any service in Africa, you would start now with a mobile phone. And here is the things that I thought about as involved all on one slide. And thank you very much. That's it. And we still have time left, or take a break, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, so please feel free to ask him any questions. And then I would also ask you to brainstorm among yourself, all of you sit together, have some time, and then find out which kind of ideas you find most appealing or interesting.
Do they have the PDF that I've shared with you?
I did not get PDF, but I will.
Okay, yes, send
I
that.
will put it on the course webpage.
Okay, let me show you some of these categories. What was not clear, because the categories themselves are not quite visible. May I touch this?
Oh, of course. Probably you shared PDF last year.
Yeah, I shared it with Art Lee. But this is something I appealed to all computer science people last semester. And I'll send this to your professor and he can forward that to you, please. But I'll show you the commodity ecology. There's some of the UN websites that feature that. But here is a closer view of some of the categories. Why did it start with textiles? Because as an environmental sociologist, I started studying textiles globally. And so I thought that's a very important category for urbanization, for pollution. And then, of course, naturally, the dyes and colorants, building materials, metals, transport materials, things you use in transport. It just kept growing and growing over the years. Oh, I'm using the wrong computer.
So basically the point is like one material can fall into one or other categories.
Yes, but also the point is you have an interesting material, you can classify it in multiple categories at the same time. Like oil. Oil is useful for energy, it's also a great lubricant. Even when we move past oil, I think for transportation, in the transportation category, it will still be one of the best lubricant that we have. Like that, mineral oil particularly. Mineral oil, as an example, mineral oil now, you won't electrify yourself with mineral oil. It's non-conductor. So there's some fascinating videos of people doing crypto mining. They have a tank of what looks like water. They drop their computer in it. It's mineral oil. So they're cooling their computer in a bath of mineral oil instead of with a fan. And water, of course, on the circuit board will pull a lot more heat out. So it's a coolant. Mineral oil is a coolant. It's also useful for industrial applications and lubricants. It's also used for human skin, which is another category. See what I mean? Some material categories, some materials fall in multiple categories. And as you have that general post point, you can start with the material, or you can start with a particular category, and you could classify it along the 130 different zones. Or somebody else who comes along and adds the tag to it with another idea on that. Yeah.
So lots of the materials, they belong into different categories, but in some cases it might be unclear if it belongs or if it doesn't belong. In the cases where it's unclear, how is anybody supposed to decide whether it's part of the category or whether it's not part of the category?
Well, I look at this from the point of view of people doing things, and the actions on the website would be somebody posts something, and so like a Wikipedia page, it's constantly debated on what's real, what's not. People add things to it. So I imagine over time, somebody comes along the mineral oil point and says, this could also be used as a coolant because I've seen this image of a cryptocurrency miner using mineral oil to cool their computer. So they just simply add a note about that, tag an additional category on that material. So I don't think the materials themselves become categories. That's an interesting question. That's really what you're asking, isn't it? How do you track data in particular things? I think it would have to be the thread of a particular category. So the way I envision it is easier. 130 categories. Mineral oil is in one category. Later, somebody on that thread says, also see mineral oil over here. And then it would appear, once they post something, it would appear over in the other category too. So you wouldn't ever drill down under mineral oil per se, or you would not drill down under a certain material and look for multiple categories. You would drill down from a wide category of choices and find much more limited 130 categories. I mean, there are probably millions and millions of options. Industrial chemistry in just the 20th century alone has invented about 80,000 different chemicals. I mean, there's no way people are going to type in 4-hydroxy F-phenol F3, 2. Nobody's going to be able to type that. But these categories are charismatic, that I think people will get the eyes easily to categorize things like that in their mind as a particular use of this material. How is this material being used?
The second question is, just like Wikipedia, if it's based off of community submission, there could be possible chances of a user just putting false...
Spam, trolls, yes.
So I'm sure that Wikipedia has some type of way of monitoring it.
They depend, unfortunately, on a very centralized database. What I'm thinking is that you could not rewrite the original note. This is not a web page. This is not a database that's like an encyclopedia. This is just a thread. And so you can't really remove it. There would be things that could be flagged for removal by other people, but it would not harm the ongoing thread in a particular category. Does that make sense? Is that a good, I mean, you guys are more expert about how it would be designed, so I'm really glad I could discuss this with you, because it's the first time I've been in a room with people interested in potentially physically doing it and what it would look like. But the way I thought about it, I thought about that problem. And that's the biggest problem, I think. How do we assure that people from some other zone don't, suddenly want to lump on China's attempts to be sustainable and mess it up?
Yeah.
Maybe the Tibetans will flag all these things in China, and Chinese will flag all the things in Tibet. But I'm going to flip this on so it's still in the background. Yeah. So that's the purpose of the GPS, I thought. The GPS recognizes people from particular zones. That information somehow is encoded that this person from this particular zone is commenting, and you can really go back and see, or with an algorithm, too many people who are not from that region, their opinions don't really matter as much. Yeah, their opinions should not matter as much.
So one of the other questions was, if a user, when he registers, he has to give a geolocation, what about for the users that are constantly moving between the regions?
Well, same with a cell phone network. They'd be registered in multiple regions, I guess. I don't think there's a way of getting around that. But most people live within, still to this day, believe it or not, within about a 25 square kilometer circle. This is big data. They use big data to look at people's activities anonymously, like about 1 million people, and physically geotag all those. And the average is about 21. Our lives are based on 21 locations that are very close together. Isn't that ironic? I'll pass you that fascinating thing that most people are not international jet set travelers. And unfortunately, those people are not going to be interested in this anyway. It's the people that do live in a region that are embedded in its problems, that stop, or don't want to keep playing the game of non-cooperation with each other. That, you know, the people that are in a region, they will be more conducive to playing with this, I think, as a platform, and not as rigging it for other people in another region. They're just not concerned with that. In Italy, it's called campanilismo, that you're only concerned with your region around the campanile. The campanile is the church tower, and you don't really care what happens over the mountain. It's just whatever happens around your campanile. Is the same. I mean, Korea is very regionalized too, in different regions too. Most people are not abstractly nationalistic. They have a national identity, but they're also a regional identity. The United States has books about this, like the 12 regions of North America and things like that, with different cultural regions. That's called bioregionalism. Bioregionalism is the cultural connectivity to a particular ecology. And you may, you know, when you go home to your zone, your images may be of a particular kind of life form, not really the, you know, building per se, but the weather pattern, the rain, the flowers, the trees, things like that.
So you've talked about producer and consumers having a direct communication.
Yeah.
So in which part of the, so you mentioned 3 key like applications, so in which part do you see that out of the 3?
In which, I'll put this back up so we can talk about it. In which part do we?
I mean, like you mentioned the database gamification
Okay.
and civil democratic.
Society, whatever.
Right. So
Industries.
out of the 3, are they mobile applications?
Yeah,
that's
all of them are.
separate?
I mean, I think they're all equally important, but you can't do all 3. I think this is like a choice. I see myself as selling 3 things today, and like you don't have to eat everything. It's like a buffet. You know, you're not going to eat the whole buffet. I mean, find some things that interest you, I suggest, and work with that.
So keep in mind that the requirement for this project is you have an application that has an interaction with the database, and it has requirements like this CRUD, CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. So data should be created in the database, should be read from the database, should be updated in the database, and should be deleted from the database.
The most important and challenging one is Commodity Ecology database. The easier prototypable one is the gamification app. Second to that would be the CDI, Civic Democratic Institution, because you can just, there's no category, be categorizing and trying to popularize voting for people. But for sustainability, what the UN's interested in is that, and I would love to tell them that people are working on this because, you know, I'm going there really to find ways to add value to their networks, and they add value to the networks of our school. And you're part of this network, of my network here, and I would love to say that we have people working on this. If you can help us, I could tell them you funded these things like this in the past. Why don't we do this again for funding cycles? And they could send some things to us or you, and that's high on the list. But this is, the first time I've met them. I don't have high expectations per se, but this is the beginning of a relationship, literally with global partners for doing this. And that's what excites me, that this is the beginning.
My question was, out of the 3 mobile applications, where do you see where producer-consumer interaction most?
Oh, that would be in the Commodity Ecology database, because both consumers can go there and say, they could ask, why isn't this here? And then a lot of people would vote up that, like, water car technologies existed for 20, 30 years, but very few people want to manufacture it. I was interviewed by somebody who archived all the basic uses of water and split hydrogen for transportation, but that was 10 years ago. Not much has happened. So the more, I think, social call an awareness that there's a large market. If enough people notice that, that lowers the cost for producers to come to a particular area and do it. That's what I mean outside the market mechanism. There's a really good book by a man named Misa, M-I-S-A, who did a history of U.S. steel. And he said a lot of the steel, the growth of United States steel in the late 1800s to the early 1900s wasn't really a market issue. What U.S. Steel did, they sent people around and said, what applications for steel can we do? And so they set up those things first, and then they built it. They didn't simply offer railroad ties or railroad rails to the world. That was the first application. Similarly here, you know, this database becomes a place where potential people interested in making money, which is no problem for me, as long as it's more sustainable, they could go to this and say, wow, there's a lot of people who've upvoted these categories. Or there's a lot of people complaining there's holes in these categories. They don't have options here. Why? There's a market. That's a market for people. So I imagine it's very useful for very, you know, in a positive way, very good for greedy people who want to make money. But it's also very good for people in the region that want to only selectively notify and invite people that want. And they could vote down for things or at least complain about the other options they lack for transportation or other things too while they're there. So it builds a conscientization. This is Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is a South American educator. It builds the idea that you're an adult actor, that education is not coming from outside of you, that you have the right to participate in your society, and that you can make your own knowledge. And this is what this database does. It helps people make their own knowledge for being adults in their region.
Let's say right now it's 130 different categories, and let's say in the future you found out you want to add 5 more.
Right.
So, like, how
would that be done?
Yeah.
You tell me. I imagine it's pretty easy to change number of columns or threads like that.
No, I mean, would it be like, and you also said about practitioners would also participate. So I'm thinking, would there be like a separate section for them to add?
There's one. I'm
things?
thinking there's one place for all those different groups to finally see each other in the same virtual community. Previously, you know, here's a development meeting of all the UN people, and they have their own meeting. Here's a business circle for Songo. No, this is a common project of trying to link these things together.
Yeah, I mean, different access, like user point access. For example, like a teacher and a student doesn't have the same level of access in Solar. So, like, would practitioners or researchers have like a
Everyone would have the
separate-
same access. There's nothing special. All the good ideas don't come from hierarchies. Yeah.
Coming back to the slide with the abbreviation VAMOS.
Okay, see, you remember that. Yeah. Let me go to that. It's straightforward, yeah. Vamos, yes. McGuinn, not McGuinn, McGuire. That's a Mamas and Papas song. That one.
Chips, network value of
Yes.
mobile products.
That one. Yeah.
This is referring to network value.
Yes.
When we're making a prototype, the network value is going to be extremely
Low right now.
low. So how would it be possible to find a successful prototype if the app is designed to be ideal in a network value that is really large?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. They built Facebook from one school. Why not start it here? I mean,
Exactly, the question is, what is an ideal first step? Because I know that most applications, it doesn't go global immediately. There's always a prototype.
and most don't. Yeah.
And
Once,
there's-
this is a different. This is blue ocean, as they say. There's no category for global development per region.
yes.
There aren't even places to share good ideas for materials at all. This is too over a unique thing. It's a place for sharing good ideas for materials. It's kind of education, but it's also per region, for every region. However many regions you decide to divide it up in, it is up to the people who design the database. But I'm suggesting watersheds make sense because they don't overlap. Whereas, one country may say, well, we're a separatist group, we're in Abkhazia, we want a separate page on a website for Abkhazia. We don't want to be part of Moldova, but watersheds are not going to change unless there's a massive earthquake.
Which I totally support,
Yeah.
because when I was first listening to this lecture, I was wondering about how can we divide the regions.
Mm-hmm.
And my first idea was, how about we just make a point where I'm at, and then just do a radius.
Mm-hmm.
But then for every single
Right.
person, there's going to be,
Everybody has a different subjective center.
and the data is going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's more just stable, adjusted, fixed. If it's
Yes.
fixed, it's much more simple.
It is. And if it's a fix at 130 categories, it's much more simple. Even your point taken, if it's fixed at 135, it's still simple. But if it's open-ended and categorized by threads under particular materials, there's no end to where the database would be. It wouldn't be useful. It wouldn't be interpretively useful for a human mind to search for a material. You want to search for a social use that you're thinking about, I think. Like, where is a new transportation option? What's a new lubricant? What's a new form for superconductors? What's a new form for data memory storage? A Russian scientist developed a really interesting memory storage. It's based on glass. It's like, if you've seen the first Superman movie from the late 70s, it's the crystals that are holding all the videos of the blown up world where Superman comes from. It's a lot like that. They're memory crystals, and he estimates the glass will be stable data retention storage for about 10,000 years. Right now we live in a digital world which has great throughput and great ability to search, but how many of you can physically take the old medium from 20 years ago and pull data off of it into the current structure? Even NASA has a problem with that. This is like an example of what would be in a category. Like a good memory storage would have long-term longevity. And so there'd be a debate about that, and people would know that there are options, or that they would know that there were not options, and they should be invented. Well, I'll just leave you the point. If you have no hope, invent. That's really what I want to leave you with. If you think there are no options, trust me, people are inventing so many things right now, and a lot of the things for sustainability already exist. They just haven't been applied, and this database really calls attention to that in a stark way. That we have so many options. There's no reason to be depressed about this. This is a very exciting time because there's so many options we have, but they're being held in place by what I would call raw material regimes that have taken over those categories, that don't want competition in the category. They use the state to subsidize a very pollutive structure, and this will be a way of gelling grassroots support for awareness that other options exist, and once people are aware that other futures can exist, that's much, much easier than trying to convince people to fight against some unsustainable thing without another future in mind. I think that's impossible. People tend to fight when they have a different future in mind. And this is generating a different future. There's a man named Fred Pollack, P-O-L-A-K, wrote a book in 1970 called The Image of the Future. Another good place to close on. It's called The Image of the Future. He said, if you look at the history of different civilizations, whenever civilization is growing and young, it has a very strong sense of what it is, where it's going. It has a projected future. And toward the end of many civilizations, particularly I'm thinking of Rome, I'm thinking of different dynasties in China, they just lost faith in themselves. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what to do. They retreat in individualism and, hermeticism or arcane knowledge that is not shared. They eat a lot. They're hedonists. There's no common goal anymore. So the image of the future is very important, and I think this provides an image of the future for people. And it's one that can be shared and learned from per region. It's not like the nationalist Olympic competition model. It's not like, well, this country wins the game in sustainability and you lost. It's more like, what can you learn from that winner? And how can we all raise the winners like that? maybe inspiring, but I'm giving you a big challenge, I know. We're past time, aren't we? Yeah. We don't, yeah, okay.
So I will share this contact details with you. Either so I will on the third floor. What is your office number?
303.
Yeah, 303.
Right off the elevator's first office on the right.
So I would really like you that brainstorm on these ideas what he has presented, and choose one which you think you are most interested in, that will help in also in your career, and then yeah, we can take it from there.
I will. You do have that PDF that I gave Art Lee. I will give it to you again.
Yeah, I will.
Okay, that's really useful. I wrote about 20 pages about this. It has copies of the websites and the commodity wheel.
Yeah,
And
sure.
everything.
Okay, right.
It's hard to see the commodity wheel, but it is on the PDF version, which is highly available. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Would we get a version of the slides?
Sure, yeah. I will forward that to.
I will put it on the
Robinson.
post page. So see you Monday.
Thank you for your lap.
Yeah.
I'll let you undo it.
Thanks for the lecture and good idea. You are already publicizing
I did it. I only had 20 minutes there, so it's short. This is the longer version.
Normally,
This is the longer version.
normally in the conference you have
Yeah. But it is just me and one other person from Sweden.
That's an option. I'll take a listen to.
Chimao. He's
Yeah.
the head of the
I moved from
software startup.
as far as I understand, to no SQL.
What is
Something no SQL.
No.
It's like a new time. It's a Friday, Monday.
Oh, sorry, the same thing by accident, so maybe we'll see each other in chat.
Yeah, you just pump in JSON, it saves JSON, and then it's searching from JSON. So it's,
Thank you, and come up and see me if you want. Be curious if you have further comments or questions, yes.
Thank you.